Good evening, everybody. Hell's Unicorn here once again, and this is my continuing thoughts regarding the situation that's going on right now in North Africa, specifically now in Libya. I'm going to start this off by reading a little article that I read a couple days ago on Truthout.org, and this was an article that actually amused the hell out of me because of how utterly naive it was. But anyway, this was put up on March 18th. This was last Friday, and it was by Robert Neyman, and it's titled "The UN Security Council Has Not Authorized Regime Change in Libya." Now, I want all of you to listen very carefully to what I read here, and I will chime in with some personal comments throughout this article, which is thankfully short, just to give you an idea of just how wrong-headed this guy's mentality is and how it's in part because of people like this that stuff like this is allowed to happen. It's a great thing that the Obama administration has resisted calls for unilateral U.S. military action in Libya and instead is working through the United Nations Security Council, as it is required to do by the United Nations Charter. Now, the administration needs to follow through on this commitment to international law by ensuring that foreign military intervention remains within the four corners of what the UN Security Council has approved. If it does not, and instead Western powers take the view that we now have a blank check to do whatever we want, the certain consequence will be that it will be much more difficult to achieve Security Council action in a similar situation in the future. And those who complain that the Security Council is too cautious will have only themselves to blame. Alright, I'm going to stop there for a second. Anybody who's been following the news today, either here on YouTube or on any of the other various networks, will take note of the fact that it only took our military and the militaries of Western Europe 2 days to violate what this article seems to think are the four corners of the UN Security Council resolution on this particular situation. This is precisely what happened when there were similar resolutions passed against Iraq, which eventually paved the way to the Iraq War. Now, to all of you out there who maybe have some latent pro-UN tendencies because you think the United Nations is actually a force for preventing war, I did a video about 4 years ago on this subject. I think I've since taken it down because its relevance was over, but there have been upwards of 50 wars since the inception of the United Nations. So the idea that the United Nations is set up to prevent wars is pretty laughable, and if that is what its purpose is, it's failed at it abysmally, since we've had almost one war for every year since this thing has gone into existence. Anyway, I'm going to continue on now. Some of the reporting on the Security Council resolution has been misleading. The Security Council has not authorized military action for any purpose. The Security Council has authorized military action necessary to protect civilians. All right, I'm going to stop right here. This has got to be the most idiotic thing I've ever read in my life. Security Council has not authorized military action for any purpose, but it has for military action necessary to protect civilians. Ladies and gentlemen, Gaddafi is renowned for his propensity to commit violence against citizens. That language, military action necessary to protect civilians, could be anything. Any action taken against Gaddafi could be justified on the grounds that it's protecting civilians. Now, if this language were meant to specifically say military action necessary to protect civilians from immediate present harm, that would be another matter. But that's not what it says. It just says ambiguously, military action necessary to protect civilians. You know, deposing Gaddafi would protect the civilians. I don't support doing that because, quite frankly, it's none of our business, and it's been pretty much proven out that every time that we replace one government with another, we get the same situation and the country ends up hating us anyway. So it's a lost cause. The only way to win wars like that is to not get involved with it. Don't fight it. All right, continuing now. It is not authorized military action to overthrow the Libyan government. Clearly, some people do want military action to assist in the overthrow of the Libyan government, but such action has not been approved by the Security Council, unless it is to protect civilians. That part added by me. And they have a link to the Security Council resolution, and then they quote the first action term. Demands the immediate establishment of a ceasefire and a complete end to violence and all attacks against and abuses of civilians. Again, we've had a ceasefire declared, but the violence is continuing, so, I mean, you have to end all violence to protect the civilians somehow, and you're not going to do that absent military force. So, again, this is utterly false logic. All right, but continuing. The Libyan government has announced a ceasefire. Like I just said, they didn't follow through on it, obviously. It is certainly true, as Western leaders have noted, that announcing a ceasefire is not at all the same thing as implementing one. But before Western military forces start bombing Libya, which they have, efforts to achieve a ceasefire must be exhausted. And I would assume that they were not even tried, but even if they were to no avail, because obviously Gaddafi is still shooting his own people as quickly as he can get his hands on soldiers with guns to do so. Continuing. To do otherwise would be to make a mockery of the Security Council. It's not possible to make a mockery of something that's already a mockery. I'm sorry. I have to laugh at that statement right there. That's ridiculous. All right, continuing. It is crucial that the goal of protecting civilians, which the Security Council has endorsed, and the goal of overthrowing the Libyan government, which it has most certainly not endorsed, be kept distinct. It's impossible to do that. But continuing, there is a clear effort by some actors, especially the French government, to conflate these goals. Earlier, Francois Baron, a French government spokesman, told RTL radio that action would come rapidly, perhaps within hours, after the United Nations resolution authorized all necessary measures to protect civilians. But he insisted the military action was not an occupation of Libyan territory. Rather, he said it was intended to protect the Libyan people and allow them to go all the way in their drive, which means bringing down the Gaddafi regime. There is no doubt that some actors want a foreign military intervention to assist in the overthrow of the Libyan government, but there should also be no doubt that this goal has never been endorsed by the United Nations Security Council, which it doesn't matter, it's happening anyway. Continuing on. Any foreign military action beyond what is necessary to protect civilians would be a military action that was not approved by the Security Council, and therefore would be a military action that violates the United Nations Charter. The United Nations Security Charter is nothing more than words on paper. Nobody's following it. It's an absolute joke. I mean, the same could be said about the United States Constitution, because nobody here is following it anymore, at least in our government, although supposedly we have some Tea Party people that are trying to get a little bit closer to the area where the Constitution is, but with mixed results. Anyway, continuing. Any foreign military action outside the framework of the UN resolution, in particular any action that kills civilians, will be prosecutable as a war crime. Well, I have news for you, Mr. Robert Naiman. You don't get prosecuted for war crimes unless you are an official in a very small and very vulnerable third world country such as the Balkan regions, more specifically Serbia. Only people like Milosevic ever end up getting tried for war crimes, not people like the Prime Minister of France or President Obama. They never serve time. So, I mean, let's get out of la-la land and let's be realistic with exactly what's going to happen here. But anyway, for those of you that want a picture of exactly how woefully naive this article was, I have a link to the Comcast news link, this is situated with the Associated Press here. There has already been a bombing attempt to try and take out Gaddafi. It hasn't been stated as such, but it has occurred. and there will likely be more of these attempts, and it will likely be justified on the grounds that it was protecting civilians. We will have a full all-out war on Gaddafi justified by this line of reasoning. A lot of these so-called fringe progressive types that are pro-UN and pro-globalist to the core, they have absolutely no idea how this stuff really works. When you have ambiguous language like that, you're going to get the worst possible result that you can come out of it. If it's an ambiguous thing about no-fly zones and protecting civilians and all that other crap, eventually it's going to turn into another Iraq war situation, which is what this will turn into. Now, just to give my opinion on this affair once again. As far as I'm concerned, this is a huge waste of time, waste of money, waste of resources, and waste of lives. We should not be involved with this. France should not be involved with all of this. By all good and necessary reasoning, we should not have any oil interests tied in with this country so long as they behave this way. But apparently, since we have no desire whatsoever to shore up our own reserves and to explore for our own energy resources, we obviously have to rely on other people, and this is the result. This can be blamed on a number of different people. There's really no one group that can be blamed for this. I mean, you could blame the green freaks for straddling us, basically making us strapped for oil supply and thus making us dependent on all these different countries. Part of it can be blamed on Obama for playing into these idiots and actually starting that oil moratorium. Part of it can be blamed on our policy towards coal producers and our up-and-coming moratorium on nuclear power, probably, with regards to what happened in Japan, and all of this other stuff. Now, everybody says alternative energy this, alternative energy that. Well, you know something? From my standpoint, alternative energy schmenergy. All right? Until it is brought into the market and it is actually producing what we need, it's all just talk, as far as I'm concerned. Yes, it could be possible that one day solar energy could replace all of these other forms of power if it can be harnessed in such a way that we're not burning more energy producing it than we are in actual product. But as of now, it's not an efficient medium, so we have to resort to other means. Wind energy, same story. We just haven't gotten the efficiency down yet. And so long as we don't have it to a point where it's efficient, and it is efficient, particularly with regards to powering our cities, there is no reason whatsoever to abandon current established means of energy creation. And of course, there's other people also. There's the neocons, the war on terror people that are just addicted to nation building and who talk about the debt in the abstract, but don't really have a practical means of addressing where the debt is particularly a problem with regards to military expenditures, particularly in overseas adventurism, and so on and so forth. The truth is that this country's culture is warped beyond recognition. And before we can have any kind of a real long-term solution to this, we need to address the problem with American culture. We have people that literally believe that you can have your cake and eat it too. Nobody deals in reality right now, and that absolutely has to change. And part of dealing with reality will include coming to terms with the fact that you cannot sell weapons technology to countries that are of a cultural mindset, as is the case with the Middle East and North Africa. Because at the end of the day, that technology is going to be turned on us when these people get pissed off. Anyway, take from it what you will. Just one disaster after another. And literally almost no one pointing it out. With prudence to myself and benevolence to all of you, good evening.